Hi, folks. Steve Urban here, founder and CEO at Riderflex. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. And as a reminder, please subscribe to the Riderflex show for updates on new episodes. And by the way, if you haven't already, check out the book we recently launched, The Riderflex Guide, Inspiring and Hiring, available for purchase on Amazon. And now, a quick word from our sponsor.
Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand.
Gordon Henry on the Riderflex podcast. Hello, Gordon. How are you today?
Great to be here with you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
You in Texas?
No, I'm up in the New York area on Long Island. Our company is based in Dallas, but we're a virtual company, and I'm up in the New York area.
Wow, how come I don't hear that Long Island? Usually there's a very strong Long Island accent. I'm not getting it yet. I can't tell.
It was bred out of me at a young age.
Did you grow up there?
Yeah, I grew up in Great Neck, Long Island, which is the western part of Long Island, basically right next to the Queens border, close to New York City. And that's where I grew up. And then I later lived in Manhattan, moved down to Philadelphia, spent 23 years in Philadelphia, and recently moved back up here to Long Island. But I'm actually a little bit further east on kind of the other end of Long Island.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, very good. Yeah, I don't hear I can tell you've been around you've been around a little bit. You've done lots of travel and lots of different things because you're a blended accent there for sure.
I think that's right. Yeah, between school and travel and work and so forth. Yeah.
And the corporate office for Thryv is in Texas, right? Outside of Dallas, right?
It is in Dallas. We have a large facility in the zip code is DFW, Texas, Dallas Fort Worth Airport. We're actually adjacent to the airport. In fact, if you went out our back door and ran to the edge of the property and hopped the fence, you'd be on the airport property.
I can tell you talk to people from Texas on a regular basis. That's also watering down your accent just a little bit. I remember the very first time I went to the DFW airport being a little farm boy from Oklahoma. And I remember thinking, wow, this is like a city. Just the airport was like a city. I haven't been there in a while though.
It's enormous. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's handy being right there, right? You fly in and boom, you're there at the office.
It's super convenient. You fly in, as you say, you're 10 minutes and you're at your desk in the office. But we went virtual during COVID, like many companies did. So sent everybody away back in March of 2020. And then what happened, Steve, was April we said, oh, should we go back to the office? Nah, it's still COVID. May, should we go back to the office? No. June, July, and we kept doing that. And finally, around August or September of that year, we said, this is all going super well. Things are great. Yeah. We're very productive. Let's just make this official. And we did. And it's actually gone pretty well. Yeah. We've let go of a couple other leases we had. The big office down in Dallas. We're looking to sublease if any listeners are interested. But we still have it technically on our books for a couple more years.
Yeah, even the most hardcore CEOs, the old school people, they're like, no way, man, they got to be in the office. They softened up, didn't they, Gordon? They're like, they saw like, wow, this can work, and now I'm saving $5 million a year on rent. Why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah, for sure. I can't speak for other people. Obviously, there's many different variations of how companies have been handling this, but I can briefly tell you our experience, which was, as I mentioned, during the first few months of the pandemic, we went virtual like everybody did, and we rethought, should we go back? Should we go back? Should we go back? Yeah. Finally decided, no, we're not going back. And the experience has really been overall positive, that we were able to make people were productive, people were responsible about it. We've measured the heck out of it, to be honest with you. We measure we measure the productivity of our salespeople, of our back office people. We measure everything, and it's really been successful for us. And right. I wouldn't be so bold as to say it's perfect for everyone, because, if you're, I'll say it this way, if you're an older, meaning like 35, 45, 55 person who's maybe got kids at home, there's a lot of pluses because you don't lose all that commuting time.
Yes.
And you have probably more time with your family or more time to do things you want to do, walk the dog. So there's a lot of pluses to it. I will say if you have you take maybe a kid who's 25 and is living in downtown Dallas or downtown New York City in a 500 square foot apartment or
with
something.
two other dudes.
Yeah, they're probably not so into it, right? Because they want to
Right.
get out of that apartment.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it's not perfect for everybody, but we found for
Right.
most people it's been good. And the other thing I would say, my other thought on it is some people have tried this hybrid thing, like to get back to
Yes.
work with a hybrid. They
Yes.
say, well, we'll
Yeah.
do both. We've been pretty non-hybrid. We've been
Okay.
pretty strict on just staying remote. And the reason is a couple. One is it allows you to hire people in places you wouldn't normally hire. Like
Yes.
we're hiring people in states and even countries where we wouldn't normally be,
Mm-hmm.
Lithuania or whatever, because they
Mm-hmm.
can work with us. And, the virtual thing obviously makes that possible. Wouldn't be possible if we required them to go to the office on Friday. Um,
Yes.
the other thing is hybrid for us. We found um, if some people are in the office and some people are not in the office, it's a bad experience kind of for both, particularly the out of office people, because they're trying to be in the room with those who are sitting around the table and they don't get the joke and they don't hear the little, you know,
Agreed.
comment. And so
Yes.
it's really better in or out.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And by the way, as a recruiter, as a guy who owns a recruiting firm, I love it when our clients call and say, yes, all of our hiring is remote because it just opens up the pool, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we had a client recently who needed 150 people for the same position in Des Moines, Iowa. And I said, well, okay, well, can we talk about this role, this, you could do that job anywhere. We can't, why do we have to recruit all of them from the same town? But anyway, yeah, there's so many benefits to it. You're right. It's not perfect for everybody. And I do think about speaking of New York, that was a topic that came up many times. New York apartments are typically small for most people, except for billionaires, and they got family, they got kids, and it's a tight space, and they actually want to get out of there. So yeah, it's not perfect, but overall, Riderflex has been remote for ever since the life of the company. So or the birth of the company, excuse me. And so we love it, and I also think it helps with tenure, employee happiness, you name it. They just and I personally as the CEO, man, if I ever have to drive to downtown again, Denver, like I actually went to Denver recently for a sales meeting with my co-founder, trying to close a client, and so he's like, "Hey, we got to be down there at 9 o'clock." So we were in rush hour, and it's the first time I'd driven rush hour, long time.
All right.
I called Scott on his phone. I said, "Man, people do this every day. I forgot." Oh God, no. Anyway, so did you grew up there as a kid? Mom, tell me about mom, dad, siblings. Give me some history.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in the early 60s, as I mentioned, in Great Neck, which at that point was uh, yeah, the suburbs were just happening,
Okay.
sort of Long Island. It wasn't as crowded as it is today. So I was, relatively small town, I would say,
Okay.
suburban community. My parents both were Jewish. They both grew up in New York.
Okay.
My dad was a doctor and was really, in some ways, kind of self-made. His parents didn't have much. They were really sort of first generation. He grew up in the Bronx on Jerome Avenue, which is kind of a
Uh-huh.
tough neighborhood, sort of even back then. I think he was a big New York Giants football and New York Yankees baseball fan because he grew up in the Bronx and New York Giants baseball too. He reminds me there was in those days the Polo Grounds. Um,
Yeah.
but he was a doctor, and I would say we were sort of middle, maybe upper middle class.
Okay.
But never like really wanted for anything, but also never felt like we were living in luxury. My mother was actually a lawyer. In fact, she
Oh,
was one of the first. She was one of 8 women, I think the first class of women who graduated from Columbia Law School in 1953. Um, so
nice.
she, so she was kind of a pioneer, really, and she,
Very
she
cool.
stayed home with us kids and never practiced law like in a law firm. Later in life, she went back. We were sort of grown up. She worked in a family law court in Nassau County.
Okay.
But she was kind of a pioneer. And then she was also quite a good writer. And she
Huh.
later became kind of an author, writing books mostly for high school kids. She felt this is back in the '70s and maybe early '80s. Even back then, she felt there weren't enough good role models for young kids, and so she wrote
Mm.
books, mostly about famous women, but not only, who she thought were good role models for kids, like Coretta Scott King and Betty Friedan. And she wrote one about Levi Strauss, and sort of famous people, but really geared towards a teenage market. And she was really a very, as I said, kind of pioneering woman for her day, and a
That's
great
nice.
mom. And my father was a great dad. But yeah, so I grew up in Great Neck, and like most kids, I was into sports. I played football in high school. Played a little basketball too.
You tall guy? What size are you?
I'm only 6 feet, so I played high school basketball.
Okay. Okay.
I was a running back and a linebacker on the football team.
Oh, okay. So you were pretty good then.
Yeah, I was okay. I didn't play college ball though. I did crew in college for a year.
Did you?
Went to
Okay. Okay. All right. You went
and
to Yale. Yeah, I saw you went to Yale. So yeah, go ahead. First of all, you must have been a straight A student to get into Yale, obviously.
I was a pretty good student, and I did well on my SATs, and I'm a good writer, so I was able to write some essays that they thought were
Well, you had
acceptable.
to be. You had to be because your mom was a writer. I mean, you was automatic.
Yeah, it's my one true skill in life, I guess, is that I can do that. Um, so after Yale, I decided to go into writing and reporting. I wanted to be a reporter actually, and so
Oh.
I went to work for Night Ritter newspapers. They offered me a job. They said, "Which newspaper do you want to work at?" They didn't have anything right there in the Northeast. I ended up going to Wichita, Kansas, of all places, and lived out in the middle of the country for 2 years. It's
I
funny,
know. Hey,
my
I've been to Wichita
my
many times. I know
well,
what you're
you
talking about.
said you're in Oklahoma, so you
Yeah. Yeah.
probably been through it. But I actually found living in the middle of the country and meeting the people there incredibly interesting and refreshing.
Yeah.
Having lived my whole life in the Northeast, I didn't know anything about the Midwest, and
Yeah.
I really loved
Yeah.
it. I had two great years
Cool.
there. Eventually, I made my way back to New York, and I worked at Time Magazine. Um, and I started
Cool.
writing about business there. They put me on kind of a business beat, and I wrote about Wall Street. And I still remember the insider trading stock scandals were breaking, and got to write about some of those. And it really inspired my interest in business. Eventually, I went back to business. I got myself into business school
I
and
saw
went to
that. Yeah.
Wharton for a couple of years, and that started my business career.
And then now, before I ask you about wife, kids, or partners, or whatever you got going on now, before I ask you that, when I looked at your resume, I thought, and your LinkedIn profile, I thought, okay, this guy's done all the right things all the time. Well, give us something good. When did you take a wrong turn, Gordon? Did you ever get in trouble anywhere? You got any good stories in there? Come on. Did the sheriff's office call your dad at any point? I mean, give me something fun.
Wrong turns. Well, um, I would say certainly in my business career, I've had lots of
Okay.
things that have not gone as expected. I started a business um, way back when, so we called it Magazines on Tape, and it was really an early version of a podcast. To be honest with you, we
Oh,
got licenses to read magazine articles on tape and sell the tapes as a subscription format.
wow.
Um, and it was a pretty interesting business. This is circa 1992, probably. So this is
Okay.
like way before even most people had a podcast or a headphone
Mm,
or anything.
mm, mm.
Um, and the idea was you play it on your Sony Walkman, if you remember that. And
Yeah, yeah, I do.
like that business, I went in with a friend of mine. He put up money, I put in all the sweat equity, and that business ultimately we had to pull the plug on because it just
Were
we
you
couldn't figure out a way to make
mm,
money.
were you
But
working at full? Were you working at full time?
I
Was that
was,
how?
yeah.
Okay, so that was the only money you had coming in. So that was your first entrepreneurial journey right there.
It really was, yeah. Other than
Okay.
a couple little jobs as a kid, but yeah, it was my first real entrepreneurial journey, and
Okay.
it totally gave me the feeling of it's all on you, working kind of night and day to make the thing work. I had a little tiny office that I rented out at 352 7th Avenue. I would often be up on that seventh floor of that building, and the lights in the whole building would go out, and I had this one office and I had, sort of like a little spare, I don't know, bulb or something that worked at night, and I'd be working by this bare bulb by myself, and I'd be like scared to walk out of the office down to the street because I was afraid I was going to get mugged.
No, obviously, you weren't married at that time. Living by yourself?
Yeah, I was single. I actually was right when I was first getting serious with my now wife, but I was still single
Okay.
then. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so you met this girl and you're like, hey, listen, I don't really have, I got this company I'm starting. It's failing. Come up to my apartment where I have one light bulb sometimes, but it'll be okay. How'd you meet your wife?
Blind date. Um,
Oh,
we had a sort of funny story, but her college roommate was working for my brother-in-law. The college roommate hadn't met me. My brother-in-law hadn't met her, my wife now,
okay.
and the two of them sort of got talking about who would be the ideal person for my brother-in-law's, for saying for me.
Yeah.
And eventually, they connected me with this girl named Debbie who was living in New York. I was this by this time I was still in business school, and I called her up. I said I was interviewing for jobs in New York, and
Oh,
we connected on a date in downtown in Tribeca, and one thing led to another. It was great, but
wow. That's
it
good.
was
That's
it was
good.
it was it was a blind date. And the funny thing was, uh, my friend, I was staying with my friend, and she was going back to her apartment, and I go back to my friend's apartment after the first date, and this was my high school buddy, and we were kind of the old high school buddies. We were like, I'm never gonna get married. You're gonna get married before I get married. Like it
One of
was,
those. Yeah. Yeah.
and he's like, I come in at like midnight, and I'm like, just got back from the date. He's like, it was terrible, right? Like it was awful. I was like, no, I think we'll actually probably get married. And my wife and my wife goes back, and her friend who set her up on the date calls her the next morning. He says it was terrible, right? She says, no, we're probably going to get married. Neither of us knew the other one said that.
How about that? Wow. Okay. Now I know. Was she Ivy Leaguer as well or no?
She was. She actually went to Yale too, but she's.
Oh,
I robbed the cradle. She's 6 years younger than me, so I never met her at school. It was through the it was a little bit through a Yale connection, but not really. We never met at school.
okay, very good. But that was obviously when they were trying to set you up, and they said, "Hey, she graduated from Yale too." There's a connection there, obviously.
You
Yeah, yeah,
got it.
I
You
got you.
got it. Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, very good. So, and how many kids you got now?
So we're lucky to have three great sons who
All
are all in
right.
their 20s, who I'm just
Okay.
super proud of. The oldest one is in venture capital. The middle one is on Wall Street working in investment bank, and the youngest one is just finishing up college at Tufts right now. So
How
three
about that?
great kids. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. And any of those boys, any rebels in there? Anybody that veered off track at all? Anybody you want to tell us about?
Veered off track. Um, they've all had their moments for sure, but nothing that probably is out of the
Uh,
bounds of a normal high school kid. Probably
of a normal high school kid, yeah. But you know what?
couple of
Being a high
couple of
school,
run-ins with the police, but
okay,
most of us have had those one or two times.
being a high school kid today would be tough, I think, with the social media and these phones and these, they're sending, got all these kids, they're sending pictures to each other and they end up on the internet. They're doing all kinds of dumb things that, of course, when you're 15, your brain is about like, this size. I always tell my friends, I'm like, man, I'm glad I didn't have those smartphones when I was a teenager. There's no telling. I'd have gotten in trouble for all kinds of stuff.
Steve, I've thought about that many times. That even though they're relatively young, like my kids grew up pretty much pre-smartphone. The
Mhm.
youngest one, kind of caught it when he was, I guess, a teenager,
Mm.
but they were basically pre-smartphone, and I can't imagine having a kid in fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth
Oof.
grade, and they're all running around with their phones and making each other feel bad because you weren't invited to the party and all that stuff. I can't imagine it.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. The other thing that now, did you have them all over for Thanksgiving? How'd you do? How'd you do there? Did you get them all?
Yeah, we did. We had a large part of the family over for Thanksgiving. It was great, and
Awesome.
all three kids were here, so it was not, we ate too
Y-
much, and the usual. But it was great.
I have a 31-year-old and a 28-year-old son, and
Mm.
they do pretty good at engaging face to face, eye to eye, and dropping the phones when they're around all of us old people. But even at their age, there were a couple of times where I kind of elbowed them a couple of times, like, no, no, phone in the pocket when you're talking to granny or whatever, like, come on now, come on, you know. We're asking for a couple of hours here of real human to human engagement. Lift your head up.
Totally agree. And my youngest son is interesting because he's the you think he's the most grew up with a iPhone, but he said he has a rule: no phones out at the table when you're eating.
Yes, yes,
And I was like, wow, that's great. Where'd that come from? So
yes.
they
My wife,
sometimes they
yes,
they teach you things sometimes.
my wife and I have that rule when we eat out for dinner. Now we should probably follow that rule closer at home. But if we go out to dinner, if
Yeah.
I'm spending $200 on a nice dinner, me and Kim eating steak, we're not gonna, no. There's no like looking at your phones. No, no. And I see couples doing that, and I always think, wow, all right, not good. Anyway, didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole. All right, so you're cruising along, you meet this wonderful woman. Eventually, you get out of the crappy apartment. Career starts flowing along, right?
So so what happened was I took this magazines on tape business. As I said, it was kind of an entrepreneurial thing, but it didn't quite
Okay.
work. But I went to a company that was sort of in that business and pitched them on the idea of taking on our idea and doing something bigger with it.
Oh, okay.
The company you probably remember because you're around my age, Columbia House. They
I
were the
was a
ones
yes,
they were the ones who
yes.
sold you the records and tapes when you were in college and you got 10 CDs for a penny. You remember that?
I
Or
was
you threw
hey,
it.
I was a member, man. I was a member. Are you kidding me?
We all were. We all were. You threw out your
Yeah.
C. You threw first. You threw out your 8 tracks. Then you threw out your
Yeah.
cassettes. Eventually, you threw out your CDs. So the Columbia House sort of backed me on this idea of creating essentially an audio book club. We called it the Audio Book Club, and it did quite well. We had a few competitors. Bertelsmann, which is a big German company, they had the Doubleday Audio Book Club, and there was a independent guy who started something very similar. And there were three of us vying for the market. And then eventually, Columbia House decided to sort of refocus on their core strategic assets, which were the music and video businesses and not the audiobook business. And we sold the audiobook business to our largest competitor, which was Bertelsmann. And at that
Whoa, whoa,
point,
whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on. Let me make sure I understand this. You guys took this business that you were working on with the single light bulb. Columbia invested or partnered or bought it.
they
What was
basically they bought it essentially. They took
they
over
bought it?
the
They bought
assets.
it,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
then you worked it, and then they sold it to one of the. Okay, hey,
Yeah.
well, your first entrepreneurial journey worked out just fine then.
It worked out okay, and it taught me a lot in terms of how to handle these
Yes,
various
yes,
negotiations.
nice.
I probably would have done a little differently now if I was 25 again, but
Ooh,
it was great. It was a
that's
great
a good
outcome.
move. Great.
And yeah, and in the end of the day, that was my sort of first real business journey. And then as I was exiting out of that, I had this opportunity down in Philadelphia, and oddly enough, it was Knight Ridder, the company I'd sort of started my career with, but they wanted me as a business development person for their sort of main headquarters operation down in Philly. And so my wife and I, by then we had one child, and we drove down to Philadelphia on a nice spring day and said, "Wow, it's beautiful here. Why don't we move here?" And we moved there and spent 23 years there. And
Wow.
I was in that newspaper business for a while. We were doing it was mostly an M&A job. They were
Okay.
really trying to expand. Even back then in the late 90s, the newspaper business was sort of starting to see that it was going to be in trouble
Yeah.
because pieces of their business, like the classified ads, which was the growth engine, all the money was in classifieds, real estate, apartments, cars, and jobs, employment. That was where all the money was in the newspaper business. And so they said we have to acquire businesses that are starting to take some of this revenue away from us. So we bought shoppers and we bought these little apartment guides. We bought some internet businesses. We bought
That's a good
job
move.
fairs.
Yep.
We started to expand the portfolio to diversify away from just the reliance on the print newspaper. And I ran that for a number of years, and that was a good gig. And that sort of what led me eventually. As I was running that, and I had this discussion opportunity with a recruiter, just like you, guy named Bud Lasalento back in the around 2000, and it was this job at this company called Yellow Book, and that led me
Yeah.
really kind of on the path that I'm still at today, 22 years later. Yellow,
But
Yellow
but
Book was a Yellow Book was a disruptor in the Yellow Pages industry. Yellow Pages industry was a $12 billion industry,
Can you believe that? Wow.
mostly controlled by phone companies.
Mm,
And Yellow Book was a little independent competitor, not aligned with the phone company,
mm.
and it was taking away share of wallet from the phone company players because they were offering basically a better product at a cheaper price, and they wanted somebody to run their marketing, and that's what I did.
How did now that early entrepreneurial bug and that successful exit? We'll call it a successful exit because it was. You didn't obviously it wasn't $1 billion exit, or else you'd be retired. We wouldn't be talking right now. But um, how did so many people that get that taste of that entrepreneurial juice find it very difficult to work for a large company?
Yeah.
And here you are working for Thryv, which is as of today, I don't know, $650 million market cap, and I don't know what they're doing in revenue, 1.5 billion or so. I don't know what they're doing in revenue. I know it's public. You can tell me.
Little over a billion. Yeah.
Yeah. How's an old entrepreneurial kid working for the big company? Do you find that difficult? Is that hard for you?
Yeah, that's a excellent question, and I think what appealed to me about Yellow Book and the reason I was able to come in there was it was a super entrepreneurial environment, and really all of the people who were key in the company were entrepreneurs or had started out in some kind of entrepreneurial
Yeah, very
environment.
attractive too. Yep.
Our
Yeah.
our our CEO at that time, a guy named Joe Walsh, who I still work with at Thryv. We're still together 20 years,
Oh,
22 years
that's pretty
later.
cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he had his own very successful entrepreneurial career, and he always fostered that kind of environment. So whether it was just your attitude about,
I see.
the company's money is my money, or my money is the company's money, I treat it as if it's my own business.
Mm, mm,
I'm careful with what we spend. I think of how we evolve or develop products as I would as if I was doing it myself. Our attitude towards hiring, all of these things that you sort of would do as if it were your own business, that was always really kind of bred into people there. So it didn't feel like a and frankly, when I joined it, it wasn't that big of a company. We were a couple $100 million. We eventually
oh,
became a $2 billion company, but it was not that big when I joined.
you joined it when it was 200 million and you've taken it to a billion. And by the way, got promoted several times. And now you're the chief strategy officer for Thryv, right? Congratulations.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, Yellow Book, yes, it had a terrific growth trajectory. A lot of that was driven by acquisition. We did 77 acquisitions during roughly a 15-year period, and some of those were very big, over $1 billion. Some of those were smaller, but we had really a roll-up strategy, and we were super successful at acquiring and integrating all these mostly other small print players and some larger print
wow.
players. And eventually, we actually even combined with a company doing something similar in London. We became part of what became the Yale Group and went public in London in
Mm,
2003. So it was quite a journey.
wow. You know what I love about your background, and I'm sure that the board members and the CEOs you work with love this too. I mean, you got this finance slash marketing slash sales. I mean, it's like, okay, well, wow, Gordon he can almost hit every function, right? I mean, that is such a valuable tool when you combine that with your experience and your education, and you can play in any of those functional buckets. Like, hey, you're a dream to a recruiter. I'm surprised I haven't called you already.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I do think it's really helpful when you have opportunities to work in
Yes.
different functions in a career. I think people sometimes want to limit themselves, or either because it's comfortable or they
Mm,
feel that's their expertise. But if you can broaden your skill set, I think it's really valuable. And as you say, I mean, today, so I exited out of Yellow Book, and then Joe, who's our CEO, myself, and several of the other key team members, we ended up moving over to this company.
great.
Was called Dex Media, and we took it over, and eventually we renamed it Thryv. But I moved in eventually into this role now where I'm doing much more kind of M&A, merger and acquisition type work and
Love,
strategic stuff.
love it.
And
Love it.
and it does uh, uh, leverage a multiple of skill sets. Yes, there's a finance component, marketing component, sales component, operational, and having been around the business for a while, knowing the different facets, it's really comes in handy.
Did you and Joe and your partners, did you guys buy a bunch of stock and take over as majority? Did another VC firm or somebody buy a bunch of stock and bring you guys over? How did the deal happen?
Yeah, so the board of the company, Dex Media, in 2000 and late 2013, early 2014, they weren't sure what their strategy should be. This industry had gone from print to digital mainly, but even the digital business was starting to become less profitable and
Okay.
become commoditized. A lot of it was reselling Google search, and
Wow.
Google gets most of the money and you don't get so much. And so it wasn't the
Mm, mm,
greatest business. And they brought in first Joe and then the rest of the team to help develop a strategy. And we really said the future for this business should be in creating software for small businesses to help them run their businesses better. And so they liked that strategy, um, brought us in as the new management team, and that was back in 2014. And here it is 8 years later, and we're doing really exactly what we said we were going to do, which was build a SaaS CRM business targeted at the same small business customers the company had always sold ads to. We still have the
mm.
old advertising business. That piece of the business is still hundreds of millions of dollars, but we've built about a $250 million SaaS CRM business.
How about that? Did Joe know the chairman or some key board members, or how'd that happen? What was the
There was a
relationship?
Yeah, I mean, we were all in the same industry basically. We were their former
Okay,
competitors. So
I see.
yes, there were a lot of personal connections, and Joe in particular was brought in by the former CEO of the company, Peter McDonald.
Okay, and the parent company, the original parent company, is like 125 years old. Like, what was that? Can you give a little history there?
Yeah, so Yellow Pages goes way, way back. The business was kind of invented back in the late 1886 by a guy called R.R. Donnelly. But and some people probably know the name Donnelly because they picked up a phone book someday. But for many, many, many years, it was AT&T. And then when AT&T got split up, it was the RBox regional Bell operating companies who ran these Yellow Page directories. And so you probably, wherever you grew up, you
Mm,
probably got a directory
mm,
from Verizon or from Southwestern Bell
mm-hmm,
or Bell
mm-hmm,
South or SBC. Everybody got those. And maybe you went online and went to yellowpages.com.
mm,
Those
mm, mm,
assets were all owned by the phone companies. And then as the business matured, the phone companies got into fiber or telecom or whatever where the next thing was, these started to be viewed as non-strategic assets and they got spun off. And sometimes they operated independently and sometimes they got bought by a competitor. And so what had been multiple companies eventually got gobbled together and all became kind of one. And the last man standing was Dex Media, and that was the company we took over.
I see. Okay, thank you for that history lesson. I appreciate it. By the way, when you're talking about the phone books, I'm having these visuals of standing in the phone booth and opening the paper phone book and looking at the page I needed, finding the name, and then ripping the page out, and then kind of looking around to see if anybody saw me rip the page out because I want to get in trouble for that.
Right,
You
right.
remember those days? Wow. Yeah. Whew, boy, the phone book days. How about that, man? That seemed like a long time ago, didn't it,
or
Gordon?
or or Steve Martin in The Jerk coming out to his driveway and saying, "The phone book is here. The phone book is here."
Yeah. Well, I now you're just you're just slightly older than me, so you know the feeling too. Remember when we used to get off the airplane at the airport, and you'd want to try to set towards the front, not to get off the plane early and get the baggage claim first. You were trying to get to the payphone wall first, right there before the painful payphone wall filled up. Right? Remember, you're trying to get to one of the phones. Wow.
Yeah, for
Well, we're
sure. Yeah,
showing our age
showing our
here.
age. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so your job as chief strategy officer, you're working with the CFO and the board for M&A. Is that you're out there looking for deals, making deals? Is that your primary role?
Yeah, I mean, some of the role, as it sounds from the title, is working on, what's the strategy of the company, what products do we and don't we want to offer, who is our customer base. There is
Mm-hmm.
a sort of strategic advisory component to it, but a lot of it now is looking at growth opportunities. And for a few years, I was working on kind of our new channels. We were developing new ways to go to market beyond our traditional sales force. But more recently, over the past couple of years, I have moved almost heavily into the merger and acquisition piece. And as I said before, we've got history doing that. That's been a way we've grown over the
Mm-hmm.
years in our prior company. And now we've done a few decent sized acquisitions over the past few years. We bought the business that was formerly the AT&T business from Cerberus, which was a private equity firm. We bought Census, which was an Australian Yellow Pages from Platinum, which is a private equity firm. And most recently, we bought a company called Vivial, which was another, Yellow Page provider. So we've done a couple of these deals over the past few years, and now we're looking at other ones like that, as well as more in the SaaS space. As we've moved more aggressively into the SaaS industry, we're looking at those opportunities as well. And now in today's environment where growth equity capital is not as cheap as it was a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
many of these companies that were losing money, that were just growing because people had invested, now suddenly they're trying to figure out what's the next step for them, and many of them are sort of up for sale. So we're looking at those opportunities now as well.
Yeah, good move. For the people that may not have heard of Thryv, let's do real quick a quick elevator pitch from Gordon. By the way, for everybody, Thryv is Thryv, thryv.com. Most people have probably heard of it, but just in case, want to make sure we get it out there. Can you give us the elevator pitch real quick? And by the way, the YouTube channel has a nice cover video on it. I mean, the website is great, but in Gordon's own words, give us the overview real quick.
Sure. Well, first of all, our customers are pretty much all small businesses. They're your local plumber, they're your local HVAC, heating and cooling guy, they're your local electrician, doctor, dentist, lawyer, maybe the dog walker who comes to your house to walk the dog. It tends to be local services businesses working on your home, your car, or some aspect of your own physique.
Okay.
And what they use it for is really to run their day-to-day operations. So what do I mean by that? Everything from the moment you sort of find them online and book an appointment to the minute they send you some kind of reminder like, hey, yeah, Steve, I'll be out to walk the dog at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, or I'll be there for your massage at 5 o'clock on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
They use, when they send you those reminders, that all goes through the Thryv CRM. Then if you have any back and forth with them, whether it's via email or text or chat or whatever, that all goes through the Thryv CRM. If he sends me an invoice, through the Thryv CRM. If I sign it electronically, I can do that through the Thryv CRM too. And then finally, if they ask you for a review, that all goes through the Thryv CRM. So all those things, many of them could be done some other way, either offline or online. Well, the beauty of Thryv is it puts it all in one place. And so the business can really manage their end-to-end client experience from kind of the minute they meet you all the way through the end of the relationship, all in one place. And for a small business, often the small businesses, they're really good at what they actually do, right? They're really good at plumbing, or they're really good electrician, but they're not so good at business management because that's not kind of what their training is. And so having a system that allows them to manage the business in one place and capture all the customer data and have it easily accessible, that's like really, really valuable to them. And that's basically what the software does.
So target company is 100,000 to 100 million?
100,000 to probably 10 million.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry. I was off base here a little bit. All right. Does it replace QuickBooks for me? Does it replace HubSpot for me? What? So right now, I'll just tell you my own story here at Riderflex. So we're using HubSpot, QuickBooks. We use Google Drive to store a bunch of stuff. We're using we're using a different tool for lead capture and all this. I mean, I don't know, 8 tools I'm opening up every day.
Yeah. So you've kind of made the case for me in a sense there, because a lot of businesses use these, we call them point solutions. And once you start having more than one point solution, because your business is growing, you have multiple needs, they don't connect so easily, right? And you start realizing, wow, I got all this different stuff I'm using and none of it connects. And you say, I could use a system that ties it all together for me in one place. And that's really where Thryv comes in. So what does it get rid of, to your question? We don't get rid of QuickBooks because most businesses use QuickBooks. They live on QuickBooks, but we integrate with QuickBooks. And so with a couple of clicks, and we have an app, set up an app store set up to enable you to do this. With a couple of clicks, we integrate so the data flows back and forth seamlessly. You don't have to change what you're doing in QuickBooks or in Thryv, and the data goes back and forth. And if you use Gmail, You can incorporate your Gmail into our inbox, so you can use, a lot of people have multiple ways they communicate. They use Facebook, they use Gmail.
Yes.
There's also a Thryv inbox where you can generate emails directly out of Thryv. So those could all sit in one inbox, so you can see all your communications in one place. Again, really valuable, so you're not using multiple channels, multiple devices. You can see it all in one place. Probably
HubSpot.
what we were.
HubSpot.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, HubSpot. I would say HubSpot is often our customers are sort of right below the HubSpot level, and HubSpot's more expensive than Thryv.
Yes. Yes.
So often from a price perspective, it's higher.
Mm,
I would
mm.
say we do most of what HubSpot does, not everything, and they do some of what we do, but definitely not everything. There's a little
Okay.
bit of a crossover. So that would
Okay.
probably be where you'd probably make a decision, which one do I want to use?
I see. Okay. Yeah. Trying to just assess my own situation. The guy that I had detail my Jeep the other day before I made the journey to Oklahoma, because I live in Colorado and I had to clean it up here before mom saw it. Anyway, he was using something because I could pay him right there on the phone. He was texting me the day before, in the morning of. I could tell it was an automated text. Hey, your appointment's coming up. Blah blah blah. I wonder if he was using Thryv. Would I, if I look at his text, will I know it's Thryv?
If you look at, maybe not the text, but if you look at either his website or if you look at an appointment reminder, you'll probably see a powered by Thryv on there.
Okay, so website. Oh, so Thryv does the website for companies.
Yeah, if the company has a website that they love, we don't have to replace it, but many customers are happy to have us build their website for them or replace
Mm-hmm.
their website.
Mm-hmm.
We build killer websites. They're fantastic. And one of the things that's nice is that it integrates, beautifully with the Thryv software. So for example, right on your website, the appointment selection, that, we build those widgets right into the site. The calendar, send me an estimate, send me an invoice. That's all built into your website. So it feels really seamless.
That's another tool we use, Calendly. Do you replace Calendly?
We do have a calendar function. So basically, yes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And what about an app? What if I need an app? Can you build me the website and the app? Yeah,
An
website.
app?
Yeah, website and the app.
We don't build apps for businesses. We found that generally people don't want apps for, if you're talking about the customers, like loading an app. Most customers don't want an app for their plumber, for their electrician, for the pizza shop, for the restaurant. It's too, most of us, just want apps for Facebook or Twitter or something like that. You don't use it for every little local business.
I see. Okay, very good. All right, let me hit you with a tough question. You may not want to answer this, but I'm guessing your CEO has to answer it. So I was watching the stock. Talk to me about the stock. What give me what are we doing to, if I'm a stockholder and I'm calling you, I'm like, all right, Gordon, come on, man. What are we doing here? Give me back to that 5-year high. What are we doing?
Absolutely. So we went public in November of 2020. Went public at about $8 the stock. Because we had terrific results and continue to have terrific results. The stock ran up all the way into the 40s.
2022, sometime in no wait.
Yeah.
When
late last year, early this year.
Yeah.
And we've had continued excellent earnings. Our third quarter earnings report was excellent. You can go back and find it on our website.
Okay.
The two things that have driven the stock down a little bit, although we're still hanging in there. We're still in the sort of $20 range, so it's come down from its highs, but it's still we think in a decent place and certainly poised for growth. Two things. One, with what's happened in the market overall this year, particularly in the tech sector, because of interest rates and the rest of what's going on in the economy. There's been some come down but we've survived that much, I would say, better than many other tech companies. The second thing is we had one very large stockholder who, for their own reasons, I won't go to the whole story, but for their own reasons, wanted to sell down their share, which was a good thing because we brought in the top names, institutional holders, the Vanguards, the Fidelities, the T. Rowe Prices. We have a stellar list of shareholders. But with that much selling going on from one source, it did drive the shares down a little bit. That was something we knew was going to happen. It really had nothing to do with us in particular. It was for their own, particular reasons of that. hedge fund. But that's pretty much done. That's run its course. That guy is down to an acceptable level, and so we feel like we're in a good place, and as our results continue to be good, and hopefully the interest rate environment improves, we think we're going to see a good recovery.
I appreciate that answer. Thank you very much. Excellent answer, by the way. You handled that curveball really well.
I've heard it before.
What's your vision on the economy? I as a recruiting firm, kicking ass the last 24 months, the last month and a half, people started getting a little nervous. It always happens this time of year a little bit anyway. But there's a little nervousness now in the market. What do you think? I know you're not an economist, but to make predictions. But what do you think next year's good for America? What's happening, Gordon, for business and stocks? What do you think?
Yeah, Steve, I'm not obviously. So this is just what I see. But
Yeah.
no, I think we're going to have a recession.
Yeah.
I think it's
Okay.
going to be a fairly rough, maybe 6 months coming. I think some of the um, over exuberance that was in the
Mm,
economy because the Fed was, had
mm.
such an easy money policy and
Yes.
everything was driven up. You look at those stock price, so many companies had such a run up,
Hmm.
and there was so much money sloshing around and all those checks being sent to people's homes.
Yeah.
Um, I think now that things are tightening up, and they have to, right? The Fed kind of has to do what to take some of the inflation out of the economy. So I think there will be a recession where I think there will be, you've seen in the tech sector some layoffs,
Yes.
which is sad and unfortunate, but probably necessary to squeeze that over exuberance out of the economy. And I think that will probably work its way through in, I can't tell you for sure, 6 months, 9 months. And then I think we'll probably interest rates will come down a little bit, prices will come down a little bit. I think you'll see, unemployment go up a little bit. I don't know that's going to be crazy bad, but I think it'll go up a couple of points. And I think that will lead us to probably something back to approaching normalcy. And I think the stock market too, then probably starting to recover maybe the second half of 2023.
Do you think some of those tech companies jumped the gun a little bit, or I mean, when you look at their performance, it seems like the layoffs was ahead of bad performance. I'm not an expert. Please don't quote me on that, anybody. By the way, we're recording this on November 29th, 2022, for
Right.
reference, in case anybody's listening to this 2 years from now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I felt like they were jumping the gun a little bit. Like, okay, guys, calm down. Let's not. You don't have to lower the lifeboats yet.
Right, right, right. Well, as you know, I mean, a lot of those companies had hired tremendous numbers of people, and so maybe they
Yeah,
had gotten a little ahead of themselves in
maybe,
that area.
maybe
And
so.
then I think also as investors punished them, they felt they needed to respond
Yeah,
accordingly.
yeah, probably so. But any layoffs, by the way, at Thryv?
Uh, no, I mean we look we're always evaluating our headcount. We're always evaluating our needs, and so there's always people coming and going. We've not had anything that worth a press release.
Okay, very good, my friend. Thank you. What's the status for Gordon? What I mean, CEO is inevitable. I mean, it, you just look at your LinkedIn profile, and like I said, these days, although I used to be a CPG executive, operations executive for a long time, I've owned a recruiting firm now for 6 years, and I'm looking at your profile thinking CEO is next step. Uh, do you have some ambitions? Do you want to talk about it here? Do you want to share with the board of Thryv and the CEO that you're about to leave and go?
I have. It's very kind of you to say, and I appreciate the nice words. Uh, I'm happy, doing what I do. I work with great people. It's an exciting company with a great future. Right now I'm laser focused on getting some of these deals done that we really want to get done in the, back end of this year, early part of next year. So, that's what I'm focused on is just helping the company do well and hopefully driving some good results and hopefully, as you said, the stock price, which I do care about, behaves accordingly, and I think it will.
I want anybody listening to this episode that recruits Gordon in the future to be CEO to understand that they have got to hire a recruiting firm Riderflex for all their hires. because that's how they found Gordon, was because of the podcast. I just want to make sure that's clear to anybody listening. Okay.
And you do an amazing job. Anybody who
Uh,
hasn't listened to your other podcasts, I listened to some of
uh,
them before this show, and you're really good at this.
well, I thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Hey, congratulations, man. Great career. I mean, your parents are obviously super proud. And your parents had wonderful careers too. Sounds like a wonderful family. Your boys are off to a great start. I mean, hey, knock on wood, man. You got it going on right now, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I was lucky to have some terrific parents. They unfortunately have both passed away, but
Ah,
I was super lucky to be able to be raised in such a good family. We tried to
you
do our best with our kids, and they seem to be doing okay too. I will say one thing. I told both of my kids, or all three of our kids, when they were younger, was as they were thinking about career choices. I did try to point them into either finance or engineering, because I had learned along the way that those are very durable skill sets to have, and you can do a lot of things with them. And thankfully, they actually listened to me. So far,
yes.
they're all doing very well with that.
I was hoping that you would give me some 80s, like an early 80s story in there. Maybe you had never told anybody, but maybe the next time you come on, we'll have a little cocktail or something before you get started. I can get you loosened up just a tad.
Okay. All right. Sounds
Gordon,
good.
thank you so much for sharing your story on the Riderflex podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. It's been great to be here.